Yes, sir.
ओके, हम शुरू करें? हम
Yes,
शुरू
sir.
कर दें?
Yes, sir. Sir, it's live.
हेलो, हेलो, हेलो स्टूडेंट्स, am I
Yes,
audible to you? Okay,
yes, sir. You are audible, sir.
so I am starting. So far we have talked to you about the in the context of the research methodology. We have talked to you what is research, what is the concept of the research, what is the importance and significance of research in the 21st century, meaning of research, objectives of research, motivation in research, types of research, research approaches, significance of research methods versus research methodology, research and scientific model, importance of knowing how research is done, research process, criteria of good research, and problems encountered by the researchers in India. Now we shall talk about defining the research problem. Defining the research problem. That is the topic of the day, wherein in defining the research problem, I have already talked to you a little, that I am going to tell you that why defining the research problem is very important. Why defining the research problem is very, very important. Defining the research problem. Now, you see, everything starts and ends with the problem identification. If you have rightly identified the problem, you are halfway through. And if you are rightly identified the problem, you will also start finding out the solution more meticulously in the right direction. So therefore, what is a research problem, and identifying or selecting the research problem is most important proposition. You cannot in any case play with it and think that you have not rightly identified the problem. So a research problem in general refers to some difficulty which a researcher experiences in the context of either a theoretical or practical situation and wants to obtain a solution for the same. So you can see even in your daily life, minute to minute, day in and day out, anything you want to solve, first you have to identify that problem. First you have to identify that point. Then only you can solve it out. So for defining is very, very important. Now, a research problem is one which requires a researcher to find out the best solution for the given problem. You are not to give the solution. You are not to give only the solution. You have to give the best solution. Best, reasonably, scientifically, best solution. So that it should not be a gigo, garbage in, garbage out situation, but it should be logical, practical, scientific, authentic, legitimate. Just 1 minute. So therefore, you have to be very careful. A research problem is one which requires a researcher to find out the best solution for the given problem. That is to find out by which course of action the objective can be attained optimally. Here emphasis is given on the word optimally. So I must talk to you and discuss what is the interpretation of optimally here. Optimal means maximal. Maximal does not mean profit making. Maximum clarity. In terms of tangibility and intangibility in terms of language and in other technical jargons. So therefore, when objectives can be attained optimally, you can, through the attainment of the goals and objectives, say goals and targets, then if they are achieved, then objectives are achieved, and thereafter you find that the mission is achieved and the vision is achieved in the given context of a given environment. So therefore, selecting the problem is something first important proposition for a researcher or investigator to go for identifying the best research problem. Necessity of defining the problem. Why should we do that? What is the necessity of defining the problem? Quite often we hear that problem clearly stated is a problem half solved. See, like we say, half knowledge is very dangerous. So there should be enough clarity, no complexity, no perplexity. There should be enough transparency about the research problem. That is very, very clear. Like I given a social example for a parents, for marriage of their daughter. First of all, they select the boy or they select the girl, that is bride or bridegroom. From here start the story. If there has been a mistake in selection of the pair, either boy or girl, bride or bridegroom, then the everything is lost. Of course, nobody is sitting in anybody's stomach, but after all, apparently you can see a person, talk to him, whether it's extrovert, introvert, ambivert, personality, soft, hard, indifferent, endurant, tolerant, patient, or say empathetic, sympathetic, apathetic. ये सब चीजें तो बात करने से पता चल सकती हैं. So therefore, there is a great necessity of defining the problem. Now, next heading, technique involved in defining a problem. There are many techniques which are involved in defining the problem. Like number one is statement of the problem in a general way. You can always go for a statement of the problem in a general way. That is given first-hand understanding. That is something like a first-hand understanding. Then understanding the nature of the problem. Understanding the nature of the problem means started developing the clarity about it. Thereafter, surveying the available literature. Surveying the available literature. That is very, very important as a researcher. When you will start after the coursework, when you will start preparing the synopsis, you will find that review of literature, survey of the available literature is very important, because the review of literature or the survey of the existing literature exactly tells you that what are the researches that have been done in your area of study. That is one thing. What are the areas of studies which have been left out, which have not been taken, and that could be said to be the research gaps. Review of literature or survey of the existing literature helps a researcher or investigator to in fact reach to the point that these are the areas which has remained untouched or left out, and that is said to be very, very important. So survey literature cannot be avoided. At least if you are choosing a pathway, or if you are going to a city or a country, you should at least know about that country. You should know about that pathway through which you are going to follow. Developing the ideas through discussion. Developing the ideas through discussion. Discussion with whom? Discussion with the peer group, your colleagues, your associates. With them, when you'll do the discussion, then you find that it is something which is going to help you, because like-minded people will come out with the very good academic suggestions. that these are the qualitative and these are the quantitative problems in your in the subject of the subject of the understudy, that is the identification of the problem. Rephrasing the research problem. Rephrasing the research problem. Now, if required, you can rephrase it. No problem. If required, you can always rephrase it. And that rephrasing is very, very important. So therefore, in conclusion, we can always say that the task of defining a research problem follows sequential pattern. It's because I told you, management is sequence, management is systematic with synergy. So the sequence is, the problem is stated in a general way, number one. The problem is stated in a general way. Then the ambiguities are resolved. Thinking and rethinking process. Ambiguities are resolved. Thinking and rethinking process results in a more specific formulation. Thinking and rethinking process results in a more specific formulation of the problem, so that it may be a realistic one in terms of available data and resources, and is also analytically meaningful. Because if you have identified a problem which is not analytically meaningful, then again the idea is not, then becomes a layman approach. That makes sense that you have to be very careful in finding out. All this results in a well-defined research problem. All this results in a well-defined research problem that is not only meaningful from an operational point of view, that is not only meaningful from an operational point of view, but is equally capable of paving paying the way for the development of working hypothesis and for means of solving the problems. If you have rightly identified the problem, you'll find it very easy, and I should not say easy, scientific, logical in development of the hypothesis. Because hypotheses are the scientific tentative assumptions and presumptions to be tested, to be proved or disproved with the help of the analysis of the survey data. So that is what is said to be very important. Now we come down to the research design. Research design we have talked about on the last occasion, so I'll give you a quick recap. What is the meaning of research design? So research design is something like a skeleton on which, like, once a person conceives of or perceives of, and thereafter a child is born. So research design is something like an conception, and then ultimately you find different people, different color, different height, different weight, different say cuts and naksha and all those things. So it is very important. It is very, very important to understand. Features of good design we have already talked to you. Remember you? We have already talked to you. Features of good design. If I recollect, we have talked to you the features of. Can anybody tell me that I have already talked to you? Research design, meaning of research design, and features of good design. Are you listening to me? Any student? Hello? Hello, you're not talking. Hello?
Sir, they can
Are you listening
give
to me?
answer in comment box. Sir, they can give answer in comment box. So they are saying
Acha,
yes,
okay.
sir.
Okay. So therefore, we talk about the important concept relating to research design. This we have also talked about, that there are two variables, dependent and independent variable, remember. Then I have talked about on the last occasion extraneous variable, which is external one. Then we have talked about control by taking example of the agriculture. Then we have talked about confounded relationship. We talked about research hypothesis. we talked about experimental and non-experimental hypothesis testing research. Experimental and non-experimental hypothesis testing research. That also we have talked about. Then we have talked about experimental and control group. Experimental and control group. Treatments. We have talked about also treatment in case of the agriculture blockings, that I said take the 2 blocks, so do the spade work, give different treatments, one different sunlight, different fertilizer, another good sunlight, good fertilizer, good quality seed, bad quality seed, and you find that accordingly the crop will come out. Then experiment. Experiment, which I said, we have taken the example of yield of crop. This is all from the agriculture one. Then experimental units. Experimental units. Different research designs. They talked about different research design. Research design in case, naturally, when we have exploratory type of research, descriptive type of research, diagnostic type of research, experimental research, empirical research. So obviously there would be different types of research design also. Research design in case of exploratory research studies would be different as compared to research design in case of the descriptive and diagnostic research studies. Similarly, we can have a research design in case of the hypothesis testing research, where we develop the hypothesis. Normally the researcher says today that in all the case, in all the situation, research hypothesis formulation and development. Research hypothesis formulation and development is must. But in case of certain researches which is based on the primary data, sometimes you found that research hypothesis is not required to be developed, and research can be done that is based on the not primary, secondary data. But if your research is based on the primary data, first hand data, then that is very essential. Development, formulation and development of the hypothesis is very, very essential. Basic principles. Here we always take the name of Professor R.A. Fisher. Professor R.A. Fisher has conducted a lot of experimental designs pertaining to the culture researches. Then basic principles of experimental design. Professor Fisher has enumerated 3 principles of experimental design. Remember you. The first is the principle of replication. The second is the principle of randomization. And the third is the principle of local control. Let us take the first principle, the principle of replication. As the word suggests, duplication and replication. According to the principle of replication, the experiment should be repeated more than once. Thus, each treatment is applied in many experimental units instead of one. Each treatment is applied in many experimental units instead of one. By doing so, the statistical accuracy of the experiments is increased. For example, suppose we are to examine the effects of 2 varieties of rice, basmati rice and say kala namak rice, or basmati rice of India Gate and basmati or other rice of the Bombay Gate, for example. So therefore, for this purpose, if we have to look to the effects of the 2 varieties of rice, for this purpose, we may divide the field into 2 parts where they are to grow, and grow one variety in one part and other variety in other part. We can then compare the yield of 2 parts and draw conclusion on that basis. But we are to apply the principle of replication to the experiment. When we replication to the experiment, then we first divide the field into several parts, grow one variety in half of these parts and other variety in the remaining parts. And by this process of replication, one after the other, here you should remember that it should be remembered that replication is introduced in order to increase the precision of level, accuracy level. When you repeat the experiment, you will always find that you are more near to the reality, accuracy, preciseness, precision, and that's why it is called principle of replication. Same is the case with the, like I give an example of COVID-19. COVID shield is ready, and Covaxin of the Bharat Biotech is ready. COVID shield of the Serum Institute of India is ready. These dry runs are done. Why dry runs are done? Why not directly the vaccine is injected and administered in order to do and find out that whether it is going to be the effect and how it is to be handled. If you first hand give directly the vaccine and person starts trembling and dying, you cannot save. But in a dry run, you ask that how are you feeling? Is there any itching or irritation or say panic or nervous breakdown? So you can handle it. That is called dry run, which is going on, which is in the final phases in India. And now immediately after that, the vaccine shall be administered. So the principle of replication makes the researcher to reach more to the preciseness, more to the accuracy. Then principle of randomization. I told you the randomness is the principle of randomness is very, very important. The principle of randomization provides protection when we conduct an experiment against the effect of extraneous factors by randomization. Random sampling, we have told, in other words, the principle indicates that we should design or plan the experiment in such a way that the variations caused by extraneous factor can be combined under the general heading of chance. For instance, if we grow one variety of rice, say in the first half of the parts of the field, another variety is grown in another half of the, then it is just possible that the soil fertility may be different in the first half in comparison to the second half. So naturally, it's going to be introducing an element of randomization. In such situation, we may assign the variety of rice to be grown in different parts of the field on the basis of some random sampling technique. We may apply randomization principle and protect ourselves against the effects of extraneous factor, soil fertility, difference in the given case. As such, through the application of the principle of randomization, we can have a better estimate of the experimental error. Now, the principle of local control. The principle of local control is very, very important in agriculture researches. This is another important principle of experimental design. Under it, the extraneous factor, the known source of variability, is made to vary deliberately over a wide range as necessity, and this needs to be done in such a way that the variability it causes can be measured and hence elimination from the experimental error. So therefore, the principle of local control helps you to find out that when you are dividing the field into several homogeneous parts, which is known as blocking, making the blocks. In general, blocks are the levels at which we hold an extraneous factor, that is an external factor. Extraneous factor means external factor, fixed, so that we can measure its contribution to the total variability of the data by means of a two-way analysis of the variance. In brief, through the principle of local control, we can eliminate the variability due to extraneous factors from experimental error. Important experimental design. Now we have important experimental design. That part we have left it. I said it is not necessary for you before the test and after the test. Now we go ahead. And then we have talked about, did we discuss developing a research plan? Yeah, I remember we have discussed developing a research plan also. I'll give you a quick recap. Like for any type of planning, a research plan is a must. So therefore, for any type of research planning, a research plan is a must, as this is essentially, especially for new researchers, because of the following reasons. It helps him to organize his ideas in a form whereby it will be possible for him to look for flaws and inadequacies. It provides an inventory of what must be done and which materials have to be collected as a preliminary step. It is a document that can be given to others for comment. Research plan must contain the following items. The first is the research objective. If you are going to draw a research plan, you need to have first a very clear-cut research objective. Without a clear-cut research objective, how can you make a research plan? No. The problem to be studied, the problem to be studied by researcher, the problem to be studied by researcher must be explicitly stated. Then each major concept which researcher wants to measure should be defined in operational terms in context of the research projects. The plan should contain the method to be used in solving the problem. The plan must also state the details of the techniques to be adopted. What technique you are going to adopt it? What quantitative technique, qualitative technique, psychological technique, sociological technique you are going to adopt for the purpose of, say, developing the research design and for the purpose of making a research plan. A clear mention of the population to be studied, very important. Area of study is called population or universe. It should be very clear in the mind. Are you going to study one retail store or the total retail store? Are you studying this, doing the census survey or sample survey, doing the study of Lucknow or Uttar Pradesh or the whole country? That should be very much clear in your topic. The plan must also contain the methods to be used in processing the data. The plan must also contain the methods to be used in processing the data. Its statistical and other methods to be used must be indicated in the plan. Such methods should not be left until the data have been collected. This part of the plan may be reviewed by experts in the field, for they can often suggest changes in that result in a substantial savings of time and effort. And then you remember, the survey has got two components. Like I told you in the beginning of my two lectures, that the entire research is being divided into two parts: desk research and field research. Desk research is that research which you do on your desk, that is by reading books, journals, articles, papers, periodicals, monographs, I mean all references online and offline. Thereafter, you develop a research plan, and as a part of implementation of that research plan, you need to do a survey. And for that survey, you need to develop a questionnaire, if it is for a bigger inquiry, or a schedule if it is for a smaller inquiry. And then the survey is not done directly in one go. It is conducted in two parts. The first part is called as pilot survey. That's called Ricky. तभी तो जहाज को चलाने वाले को पायलट कहते हैं. ऐसा थोड़ा कि एकाएक आपने जहाज उड़ाया मोसी एयरपोर्ट से और सीधे अमेरिका चले गए. बीसियों बार पायलट्स जाके रेकी कर चुके, और आज नहीं पहले हमेशा. सडनली प्राइम मिनिस्टर को लेके जाना है आपको किसी वैली में, तो पहले रेकी या पायलट सर्वे किया जाता है to find out what are the obstacles which can come in your way, which can disturb you. And the pilot survey, the most important use of the pilot survey is that it helps you to improvise your questionnaire or schedule first. What are the problems in your questionnaire? What are the problems in your schedule? That is the first point to be kept in mind. And thereafter, you improvise your questionnaire, add the views of the respondents, add the views of the other peer groups, and make a final questionnaire and then you go and administered it to the respondents to get back the answers for the final, and that is called final survey, which is also called as full-fledged survey. And after final survey, when you collect the data or the information, then it is being analyzed with the help of the quantitative techniques, and then you reach to the interpretation analysis of data, to the logical conclusions, logical findings leads to the conclusions, conclusion leads to the suggestions, and then you prepare the report and then submit it. Now we come down to write down sampling design. Next point, sampling design. In fact, I should have started from here. Rest I have done the recap, those who have, because there has been a problem of connectivity and other things. That's why I'm talking about the sampling design. Now in sampling design, the first point is write down census and sample survey. Abhi, right now I told you, census means the survey of the entire country, chunk, whole country, whole Lucknow, whole UP, big one, big chunk. Sample survey means survey of a handful people. They are being so selected that it gives you, I mean, the items so selected in the sample should be true representative of the population or universe at large. That is called sample survey. And all items in any field of inquiry, remember you, all items in any field of inquiry constitute a universe or population. All items in any field of inquiry constitute a universe or population. A complete enumeration of all items in the population is known as census inquiry. A complete enumeration of all items in the population is known as a census inquiry. So that is called census, complete all items. But if you are, I mean, selecting few of them, so items, every third items or 11th items, or say 1/4, what we say in random sampling, we select 1/4. The selected respondents constitute what is technically called as a sample. The selected respondents constitute what is technically called a sample. Technically called a sample, and the selection process is called sampling technique. And the selection process is called sampling technique. A technique through which you select respondents, that is sample. A technique through which you select the sample is called sampling. And that sample is a handful. Like I give you an example of Wipro flour atta and ITC tobacco, say flour atta, and say cosmetics, they are making, ties they are making, otherwise they are all computer giants. So if Infosys and the Wipro, or take of the case of the Baba Ramdev herbal series of the goods and services, if they make it and do the sampling and make experiment on whole of the items so produced, whole of the products and services so produced, then what is left for selling? Then what is left for selling? And that's why it is said that it is very, very important proposition. The selected respondents constitute what is technically called a sample, and the selection process is called sampling technique. The survey so conducted is known as known as sample survey. So therefore, selected respondent constitute the sample. The technique is called sampling technique, and the survey is called as sample survey. So these are the three technical part you should know about it. That is, what is sample, what is sampling technique, the technique through which the sample is selected is called sampling technique, and the survey which is conducted is known as sample survey. Alphabetically, all from the algebra angle, remember you, The size of the population is represented by the capital word N. Population size is called as N. So therefore, N minus 1 becomes the sample. The survey so conducted is known as sample. तो हो गया आपका. Let the population size be N, and if a part of size N, small n, which is lesser than capital N, that is the population, this population is selected according to some rule for studying some characteristics of population of group consisting of this n units is known as sample. So n minus 1 becomes a sample. Now implication of sample design. There is an implication of sample design. The sample so selected by you shall tell you the story. That is going to be the story. That implication is very, very important. A sample design is a definite plan for obtaining a sample from a given population. It refers to the technique or the procedure the researcher would adopt in selecting items for the sample. A sample design is a definite plan for obtaining a sample from a given population. It refers to the technique or the procedure the researcher would adopt in selecting items for the sample. Sample design may as well as lay down the number of items to be included in the sample. That's called ITH. ITH item, third, seventh ITH. Now we talk about steps in sample design. The first step in sample design, while developing a sample design, the researcher must pay attention to the following points. The first important following point is called type of universe. What is the type of universe? Truly speaking, from practical angle, normally the universe is divided into two parts: homogeneous universe or heterogeneous universe. A small universe or big universe or the large universe. Small sample or a large sample. So type of universe is very, very important. If you take all the children, all the boys only, or all the children, boys and girls below 10, it becomes a homogeneous. Or only boys, more homogeneous. Boys and girls, heterogeneous. Boys and girls and men and women together, heterogeneous. So if only one type of universe sample is there in a universe, it's called homogeneous. If the sample consists of many other types, it's called as heterogeneous. Sampling unit. A decision has to be taken concerning a sampling unit before selecting sample. A decision has to be taken concerning a sampling unit before selecting sample. Before selecting sample, you have to do that. A decision has to be taken concerning a sampling unit before selecting sample. Sampling unit may be geographical one. I said na, like a district Lucknow or a state Uttar Pradesh or a village or or whole country, or even, or if you go down more micro, it could be a house, it could be a flat, it could be a mohalla, it could be a family, it could be a club, it could be a school. That is all called sampling unit. It may be an individual. The researcher will have to decide one or more of such units that he has to select for this study. Source list, number 2. Number 3, source list. You see, you have to derive the sample from certain source. That is called as source list. Source list is also known as sampling frame. Source list is also known as sampling frame, from which sample is to be drawn. You always draw a sample from the sampling frame. It contains the names of all items of universe. If source list is not available, researcher has to prepare it. If source list is not available, researcher has to prepare it. Such a list should be comprehensive, correct, reliable, and appropriate. It is extremely important for the source list to be as representative of the population as possible. Size of sample, very, very important. The findings depends upon the size of the sample. If the sample size is very large, means population size is very large, universe is very large, automatically sample size is very large. This refers to the number of items to be selected from the universe. Earlier I told you. This refers to the number of items to be selected from the universe to constitute a sample. The size of the sample, population variance needs to be considered as in case of large variance, or vice versa in the small variance. This is a major problem before a researcher, how to select the size of the sample. The size of sample should neither be excessively large nor too small. It should be optimum. It should be optimum. An optimum sample is one which fulfills the requirements as efficiency, representatives, reliability, and flexibility while deciding the size of the sample. The size of population variance needs to be considered as in case of large variance, usually a bigger sample is needed. The size of the population must be kept in view, for this is also limits the sample. For example, I give you budgetary constraints, costs invariably be taken into consideration when we decide the sample size. भाई ऐसा थोड़ा कि आप you have a billion and trillions of money. Budgetary constraints are always there. That is budgetary constant in terms of time, money, energy. Then other logistic constraints, other technical constraints. For example, other constraints. For example, performance, cost, time is one another constraint. Invariably be taken into consideration when we decide the sample size. Now we come down to the next point, that's called parameters of interest. What are the parameters of interest? First, you have to draw the parameter. Like you can give an example, PCT, performance, cost, time is one parameter. Quality is another parameter. Work breakdown structure, system to subsystem, subsystem to task, task to subtask, subtask to work package. Men, money, machine, material, market methods. Land, labor, capital, organization, entrepreneur. These are all called parameters. Height and length, height and weight. PP है, parameter क्या है? It should be 120/80, normal. Sugar है, parameter क्या है? कि morning में खाली पेट अगर आप ले, empty stomach, it should come somewhere 85 to 115. दो खाना खाने के 2 घंटे के बाद लें, it should be somewhere 135 to 150. This is called parameter. इसके ऊपर हुआ तो हाइपर होगा, नीचे हुआ तो हाइपो होगा, चाहे वो पीपी हो चाहे वो शुगर हो. So that is a parameter of interest. Then budgetary constant, money matters, very, very important. You have to hire the respondent, you have to give them salary, you have to give them logistic support, you have to give them other things, mentors, advisory, so on, so forth. Lot many things you have to give. Cost considerations from practical point of view have a major impact upon decision relating to. Then sampling procedure. Sampling procedure, finally the researcher must decide the type of sample he will use. Because sampling decided must be used through a certain sampling procedure. There are several sample designs out of which the researcher must choose one for his study. Obviously, he must select the design which for a given sample size and for a given cost has a smaller sampling error. So your sampling procedure should be such good that you select that such good sample size with samples that the error that is called sampling error, which creeps into when you select the sample, either human or machine based or technical. So try to minimize the sampling error while choosing and finalizing the sample. Criteria of selecting a sampling procedure. Criteria of selecting a sampling procedure. Very important. See, there are too many sampling procedures. Which you will select them? First is called, these are the steps. Because after all, what you have to do is, you have to minimize the bias and prejudice. Bias and prejudices. So therefore, for that purpose, first of all, you have to see inappropriate sampling frame. Inappropriate sampling frame. If the sampling frame is inappropriate, that is biased representation of the universe, it will result in systematic bias. Bias will creep in systematically because of the inappropriate sampling frame. If the sampling frame is inappropriate, that is the bias representation of the universe, it will result in a systematic bias. Defective measuring device. Defective measuring device. If the measuring device is constantly in error, it will result in systematic bias. Then defective measuring device, then non-respondents. There are respondents, there are non-respondents also. Suppose you have a sample size of 100, it's not necessary that all the 100 people are going to respond to you. There may be 20 people odd, or 10 odd people, 5 odd people who may not respond to you. The reason is that such a situation, the likelihood of the establishing contact or receiving a response from an individual is often correlated with the measure of what is to be estimated. Then interminacy principle of indeterminacy. You should not be indecisive, you should be determined, you should be decisive. Indecisiveness, indeterminacy principle say makes you to go for committing more sampling error. Sometimes we find that individuals act differently when kept under observation than what they do when kept in non-observed situation. Natural bias in the reporting of data. Natural bias in the reporting of data. See, there is a human bias, there is a natural bias, there is a machine bias, there is a technical bias. So technical bias or machine bias can be minimized, but the human bias and the natural bias cannot be minimized. Yesterday we were sitting on a temperature of 28 degrees, which was from last 7 to 8 years, the maximum one, and today we are sitting in a temperature of below 10 degrees. That is a nature. Can you have a control on that? No, you do not have a control on that. Suddenly you have to meet it out by wearing more clothes and so on. Now, characteristics of good sample design. Characteristics of good sample design. A sample design must result in truly representative sample. First point. A sample design must result in a truly representative sample. A sample design must result in a truly representative sample. Sample design must be such which results in a small sampling error. Sample design must be such which results in a small sampling error. Sampling design must be viable. Sampling design must be viable in the context of funds available for the research study. Sample design must be viable in the context of funds available for the research study. Sample design must be such so that systematic bias can be controlled in a better way. Systematic bias may be controlled in a better way. Sample should be such that the results of the sample study can be applied in general for the universe with a reasonable level of confidence. Level of confidence and level of significance is very, very important. Sample should be such that the results of the sample study can be applied in general for the universe with a reasonable level of confidence. We have different types of sample designs. We have got probability sampling, we have got non-probability sampling designs, we have got random sampling designs, we have got non-random sampling designs or sampling. The sample designs are basically of two types: non-probability sampling and probability sampling. Overall, randomness element is very important, that is true, but overall we have got two: probability sampling and non-probability sampling. First, we take up the non-probability sampling. Non-probability sampling is that sampling procedure which does not afford any basis for estimating the probability. Non-probability sampling is that sampling procedure which does not afford any basis for estimating the procedure. Estimating the, sorry, not procedure, estimating the probability. Non-probability sampling is that sampling procedure which does not afford any basis for estimating the probability that each item in the population has of being included in the sample. Non-probability sample is also known by different name, as somewhere it is also known as by deliberate sampling. Non-probability sample is called deliberate sampling also, because probability are not working out, so it's deliberate. Otherwise, toss a coin, what is the probability of coming head and tail? 50-50%. So that is said to be. But in non-probability, different situation. Now we come down to probability sampling. Probability sampling is also known as random sampling or chance sampling. Randomness, I told you, more scientific. Probability sampling is also known as random sampling or chance sampling. Under this sampling design, every item of the universe has equal chance of being included or inclusion in the sample. It is so to say a lottery method in which individual units are picked up from the whole group, not deliberately but by some mechanical process. So that is what is said to be probability sampling, which is also called as random sampling. I told you the most scientific method of doing the sampling is called random sampling, because in random sampling there is equal chance of each and every item to be the true representative of the population at large. Size of the population is 5,000. Take it 1/4, do the testing, and 5,000 is cleared. Random sampling from now you have a finite universe, you have an infinite universe. Like population is a finite universe. Can population infinite universe is, for example, stars in the sky. Can you count them? No, you cannot count. It's an infinite number. So there are certain finite number and there are certain infinite numbers. So random sampling from an infinite universe. So far we have talked about random sampling, keeping in view only the finite population. But what about random sampling in the context of infinite population? It is relatively difficult to explain the concept of random sample from an infinite population. And therefore, we find that if we take an example, few examples will show the basic characteristics of such a sample. Basic characteristics of such a sample. Suppose we consider the 20 throws of a fair dice. If we throw the dice 20 times a sample from the hypothetically infinite population, which consists of results of all possible throws of the dice. If the dice means पासा फेंकते ना, शकुनी मामा वाला महाभारत वाला पासा, कितनी बार आएगा, 6 आएगा कि 9 आएगा, that becomes probability sampling. That becomes a probability sampling, random sampling. That if you toss a coin तो 50-50% हो गया, and if you throw a dice, so of probability of getting a particular number, say 1, is the same for each throw, and the 20 throws are all independent, then we say the sample is random. So that is said to be very important. Brief, one can say that the selection of each item in a random sample from an infinite population is controlled by the same probabilities, and that suggestive selection are independent of one another. Now we have another type which is called as complex random sampling design. That was simple. Now we talk about the complex random sampling device. In a complex random sampling designs, probability sampling under restricted sampling techniques, or you can say some of the popular complex random sample designs are as the complex random sample design takes the following forms and the shape. Number 1 is called systematic sampling. Systematic sampling. In some instances, the most practical way of sampling is to select every ITH item. I said the ITH, 7th, 8th, 5th, 6th, every ITH item on a list. Sampling of this type is known as systematic sampling. Every fourth. So then every fourth, 5000 अगर सैंपल साइज है तो हर चौथा आइटम लेना है, तो 5000 में हर चौथा आइटम लेना है और उन सबको जोड़ के एक सैंपल बन जाएगा, और दैट इज कॉल्ड systematic sampling. Stratified sampling, number 2. Stratified sampling, if a population from which a sample is to be drawn does not constitute a homogeneous group. If a population from which a sample is to be drawn does not constitute a homogeneous group. A stratified sampling technique is generally applied in order to obtain a representative sample. तो stratified sampling जब homogeneous नहीं है group, तो heterogeneous group है, तो उसको strata में हम stratified sampling को strata में बांट देते हैं और हर strata को एक homogeneous group मानते हैं, because it doesn't constitute a homogeneous group. A stratified sampling technique is generally applied in order to obtain a representative sample. Under stratified sampling, the population is divided into several subpopulations that are individually more homogeneous than the total population. The different subpopulations are called strata, and then we select item from each stratum to constitute a sample. So stratum to strata, like datum to data. So that's why it's called stratified sampling. इसके ज्यादा आप न्यूमेरिकल पार्ट में ना पढ़े, वो तो मैथमेटिक्स से स्टैटिस्टिक्स के लड़कों के लिए है. Then we come down to, which is not a part of, but we have to know only the definitions. Write down cluster sampling. When we divide the entire population or universe into different clusters. In a cluster sampling, the total population is divided into number of relatively small subdivisions, and each subdivision is called and known as cluster. In cluster sampling, the total population is divided into a number of relatively small subdivisions, which are themselves clusters of still smaller units, and then some of these clusters are randomly selected for inclusion in the overall sample. That is called cluster sampling. From each shelter, you draw the sample and the totals. For example, also assume that there are 2000 machine parts in the inventory. एक इन्वेंट्री में 2000 मशीन पार्ट्स हैं. To now 2000, 20,000 machine parts in inventory at a given point of time, stored in 400 cases of each, 50 each. 400 के बॉक्स में 20,000 मशीन के पार्ट्स भरे हुए. Now using a cluster sampling, we would consider that 400 cases as clusters. एक क्लस्टर को 400 केस कहेंगे हम. And randomly select n cases. N means it could be 5, 6 or what. And examine all the machine parts in each randomly selected case. जिस केस को सिलेक्ट कर लेंगे जिसमें 400 पार्ट्स हैं उसकी हम पूरी स्टडी करेंगे और फिर उस क्लस्टर को क्लियर कर देंगे कि ये क्लस्टर रेंडमली अच्छा है. क्लस्टर सैंपलिंग इज नो डाउट reduces cost of concentrating surveys in selected clusters, but certainly it is less precise than the random sampling. तो random sampling से less precise है मगर फिर भी काफी scientific in approach है. Then we call it area sampling. If cluster happens to be some geographic subdivisions, then each geographic subdivision is called area. Lucknow is divided into north, south, east, west, and central Lucknow. There could be north, south, east, west, and central clusters. In the cluster, we can divide further divide them into the area north, south, east, west, and central area. Then we have, if we do the sampling at many stages, that is called as, note down, multi-stage sampling. Then it is known as multi-stage sampling, which we do it at many stages. Multi-stage sampling is a further development of the principle of cluster sampling. Suppose we want to investigate the working efficiency of nationalized banks in India, and we want to take sample of few banks for this purpose. The first stage is to select large primary sampling unit in such a state in the country. For example, it is Uttar Pradesh. Then we may select certain districts in Uttar Pradesh and interview all banks, say Lucknow, in the chosen district. This would represent in two-stage sampling decision design with the ultimate sampling units being cluster of districts. That is said to be there. Then we come down to sampling with probability proportional to size. Sampling with probability proportional to size. In case the cluster sampling units do not have the sample number of approximately the same number of elements, it is considered appropriate to use a random selection process where the probability of each cluster being included in the sample is proportional to the size of the cluster. The sampling with probability proportional to use, you have to do the sampling and you are making it a probability one, and then you have to use a size के हिसाब से आपको बनाना पड़ेगा. We give, and the last we say the conclusion that actually I'm not feeling well. I have a cough, cold, and this thing. So I'll be finishing it off today. Your all queries and questions I shall take tomorrow morning, say at 10 o'clock. So in conclusion, finally we say, from a brief description of the various sample designs presented above, we can say that normally one should resort to simple random sampling. Best method is simple random sampling because under it bias is minimum, generally eliminated, and the sampling error can be estimated. Sampling error can be estimated. But purposive sampling is considered more appropriate when the universe happens to be small and a known characteristic of it is to be studied intensively. There are situations in real life under which sample designs other than simple random samples may be considered better. And वो गई हैं बाजार, हाँ गई, considered maybe these are the situations in real life under which sample designs other than simple random samples may be considered better. Say easier to obtain, cheap, or more informative. And as such, the same may be used in a situation when random sampling is not possible. Then we have to use necessarily a sampling design other than random sampling. Or at times, several methods of sampling may well be used in the sample design. Now, what you have to do is that each one of you have to, so far whatever I have taught, 3 units I have taught, three big chapters: research designs, then say sampling design, sample and sampling design. Up to this point, please choose a topic. Please choose one topic, you all, any one of you. Any one of you can. All of you should choose one topic and write an assignment of 1 page, not more than 1 page. Write an assignment of 1 page. Take some time, like probability sampling. Write down 1 page. It should not be only the topo of the kitab. बुक से पूरा नहीं उतारिए, थोड़ा अपना माइंड लगा के व्हाट इज रिसर्च, मीनिंग ऑफ रिसर्च, सिग्निफिकेंस ऑफ रिसर्च, इंपॉर्टेंट डिजाइन, व्हाटएवर. मगर एक असाइनमेंट हम आपको होमवर्क दे रहे हैं, आज कल सुबह तक बना के हमें कल बताइए और उसको हमको भेजिए. कैसे भेजेंगे इसको आप इसमें हमारे पास? हाउ इट इज टू बी सेंट? ऑनलाइन कैसे भेजेंगे? आर लिसनिंग टू मी? ऑनलाइन कैसे भेजेंगे? हेलो? How they will send me the sampling or assignment online?
Sir, if you can give your email address, then they can send it through that. Or
हाँ तो you give me my you give my this thing.
Yes, sir.
Gmail.
Yes, sir.
I'm WhatsApping you. You give it.
Yes, sir.
Personal ID. Personal ID.
Yes, sir. I'll write it on comment box. तो प्लीज सर आप व्हाट्सएप कर दीजिए मुझे.
अभी करते हैं आपको, ठीक है? थोड़ा हमारी Divya, I'm not feeling well. There's a lot of cough and cold and all. So I'm finishing
Yes,
up
sir.
class today, right now. Tomorrow I will take at 10 a.m. Right? हम WhatsApp कर रहे हैं आपको email. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, sir. Take care, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sir. Students, you can mark your attendance. This is the link for the attendance. It is open, and you can you have to log in your Gmail through IUL ID only. Yes, I am sending one Google form also for assignment. Yes, Google Classroom is a better option. Will work. I'll give suggestion over there. I'm checking whether link is working or not. Already 56 responses are there. Log in through your IUL ID, please. And this is the email address of sir. You can send your assignment to sir. Google link is working. Already up till now, more than 70 responses are there. email address, you can see it at the screen also. You just check out with your friends what was the assignment. We are ending the broadcast now. Thank you, everyone.